Matt, sometimes in the comments section, we get things like people saying, oh, you make my dreams come true, like Holland Oates. But in this fight, we don't have Holland Oates. We have Holland and Giles. We get Kevin Holland, the trailblazer, taking on the problem, Trevin Giles. And Matt, I made a problem in terms of that analogy. But in terms of this fight, it's an interesting one because you can kind of compare styles. You can contrast them a little bit. You look at Trevin Giles coming into the UFC, plenty of finish wins. He was beating really, well-known names on the regional scene. Guys like Brendan Allen, Ryan Spann that have made it so far with the promotion. But it's been a mixed bag of results that he's had so far. I mean, he had the big win over James Boknovic. He beat Antonio Braga Nieto that I'd like to see fight every weekend. The guy's only 32. Where have you been, Mr. Nieto? Where have you been? But he dropped 2 in a row, and then he had that fluky win over James Krause that did he win?
On like a day's notice, too, because his opponent dropped it anyways.
It was a weird one. And for Kevin Holland, it's kind of the same thing. I mean, he fought really big names on the regional scene, came into the UFC on short notice, fights Thiago Santos, loses predictably. He's won some nice ones. He's lost some weird ones, like namely the Brendan Allen fight where it looked like he was beating him and then all of a sudden he got submitted pretty quickly. Had a great win over Anthony Hernandez in his last time out this spring. Big finish win in the first round. Somewhat surprised that he didn't fight sooner. He did have a fight booked a couple of weeks later against Daniel Rodriguez, out due to a shoulder injury. So he steps in here against Trevin Giles. It's one of those ones that we could really get into the X's and O's, but I think it's really worth noting the style matchups in this fight, as well as the consistency or lack thereof. So, Matt, what do you make out of this one?
I think it's a really interesting fight, and it comes down to who does what better, I guess, like every fight does. Kevin Holland and Trevin Giles do match up fairly well, just skill-wise, because when you look at what Trevin Giles does well, he's a decent striker, but he's a pretty good grappler. We saw that in the James Krause fight, but the problem was, we also saw in the James Krause fight, his defensive grappling leaves a lot to be desired, because Krause had his back for the whole first round of that fight, and really threatened a lot with some chokes. Now, if Kevin Holland gets that same position on you, I would assume Kevin Holland's going to be able to finish that just because he's a real middleweight, and he's a fairly big middleweight at that. Good on the ground, good on the feet, doesn't really have a lot of weaknesses, just glaring holes. His wrestling defense isn't great. The Thiago Santos fight really proved that. Now, I know that was his UFC debut, so you can't take much from it, and that's Thiago Santos. So
and up a weight class.
Exactly, so you're probably going to lose to him no matter what. But it was just an interesting fight because Santos just basically picked him up, took him down, and then ground and pounded him from guard the whole entire fight. And it showed a lot from Kevin Harlan because, A, he might have the greatest chin ever.
NBA's Kevin Harlan, but keep going.
Holland. Anyways, Kevin Holland, he's going to be able to keep range in this fight, and I do think that's going to be a really big problem for Giles, especially if he is going to try to go for any wrestling at all, because if Kevin Holland can just stand halfway across the cage and hit you with those front kicks, use his jab, keep on moving a lot. And the weird thing about Giles is he's a guy who doesn't cut a ton of weight to be a middleweight. Not the biggest middleweight you're ever going to see. Doesn't have the best cardio, though. He is a guy who tends to fade as the fight goes on. Saw that in the Krause fight as well. Split decision. Came down to that third round. Personally, I believe Krause won. And Giles, you could just see the fight had kind of worn on him at that point. And with Kevin Holland, he's a lot of things, but he's not a guy who gets tired in the third round, and that's what I really think is going to be the X factor between these two guys, because skill-wise, they match up really well, but cardio, Kevin Holland just can go for days and days and days, and I just don't have that same confidence with Trevin Giles' gas tank.
And I mean, you can try and do MMA math in this one, the fact that Trevin Giles fought Gerald Meerschaert and lost that fight, and he fought Zach Cummins, a teammate of James Krause, and he lost that fight, and those were two fights where there were glaring holes in terms of cardio, like you brought up. Now for Kevin Holland, yeah, he has a win over Gerald Meerschaert. He beat Alessio Di Chirico, and his last one had a quick finish over Anthony Hernandez, and that fight against Daniel Rodriguez would have been awesome. What we get here, it is an interesting fight. It's not interesting in terms of what fans are thinking in terms of voting, as well as odds makers. Kevin Holland minus 215 favorite. Trevin Giles coming in the plus 175 underdog. On Tapology at 665 votes, 92% going Holland. They're splitting it up pretty evenly between submission, knockout, and decision. I think this is a fight where Kevin Holland, it's kind of tailor-made for him in a lot of different respects. Trevin Giles, in terms of distance management, I get it. He has a lot of finished wins over really notable opponents. But I think Kevin Holland's one of those guys that can really beat him in just about every aspect of the game. So I would expect Trevin Giles to, try and push a pace. I don't see it working all that great. And I see this a win for Kevin Holland.
I agree 100%. And here's the worst part for Trevin Giles. If you're not winning the first round, the third round's going to be a lot worse. If you're Giles, you really got to get off to a really good start. Try to damage Holland to the point where his cardio is going to fade just due to the fact that he's taking so much damage. But that's really his only path to victory that I see, at least. I'm sure I'll be proven wrong. But I do think Kevin Holland's going to be able to get this done.
Matt, really looking forward to this card. We have 11 videos for the entirety, including our really good extended look at our 3-round main event between Derek Brunson and Edmund Shahbazyan. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. And as we always say, let's get into it.